All right, so this one comes from thriveglobal.com. I don't know this source very well, but I think I did preen this from like Smart News or something like that, so I'm going to give it a shot.
Groovy.
Gobekli Tepe is rewriting our entire understanding of human history. Gobekli Tepe has made lots of people scratch their heads, even though it was uncovered during the 60s. And you say this means Potbelly Hill or something like that?
Yes.
In what, like
Turkish?
Turkish? Okay.
Yeah.
Its significant impact was just fully realized in 1994. The historical site is situated in the southeastern part of Turkey, approximately 12 kilometers northeast of the city of Sanlurfa, I guess. Despite this, it predates the country's establishment by a shitload. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we read all that.
Oh, it's weird when they do that.
Yeah.
That's why there's ... right? History of mankind? Or no?
Archaeologists.
There it is. Established by a huge margin.
Huge margin, yeah. This archaeological site has existed for so long that it rewrites people's understanding of not just the history of Turkey, but also the history of mankind. If we base facts on previous knowledge about how modern civilization started, then Gobekli Tepe must not be there. However, this place truly exists and has been around for almost 12,000 years.
Yay!
Well, we talk about this all the time. We're always talking about how Gobekli Tepe is like this weird thumbtack in the timeline that it shouldn't be there, right? It's like drags the timeline.
Yeah.
So I saw this pop up, so I figured this might be good to give people context that haven't listened to the show since episode 8,
yeah,
or whatever it was. So
yeah, I think it was actually 3 and 4, Matt.
It was way back. Yeah,
8 was Orko R.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was ancient trippy gods.
It was 3,
yeah.
And then the other one was like history of the world that never was. Or something like that.
Gobekli Tepe has become a tourist attraction for years now, but it's still under archaeological study. Turkey's current political issues have made things harder than usual. Despite this,
always,
the historical site has been a source of pride for locals, and some parts of the area are being restored. Gobekli Tepe, if all evidence is considered, is the oldest significant site that was made by human beings.
Yes.
This, in turn, has made the place one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in history.
Yes.
Now, we're looking at pictures here for those that are just listening, but if you're watching on YouTube, you get the full experience. But anyway, the one of the things that's really cool about the monument, or whatever you would call these stela or stela or whatever they are, they're T-shaped sort of stones that stand up pretty tall. But everything that's on these things is carved in relief, which means the animals that are carved on these pop out. So they made these the hardest way possible. They didn't just carve the animals into the stone.
Yeah,
that
they carved around the animals.
They carved all of the stone away around the animals.
Look at that scorpion.
And I think that it has images of animals that are not considered to be indigenous to this area ever.
That's what they believe, yes. Yeah. And I know this probably next sentence is going to be a good sentence, or paragraph rather. But I think one of the main things for me is that the reason why history would need to be rewritten is because the first civilizations was either Egypt or the Sumerians in that area in the Fertile Crescent, which this was a part of. But that was like when the first civilization was supposed to be blooming, the first congregation of people and things like that.
Okay.
But this kind of sets the clock back, showing you that maybe the first congregations of people were around these kinds of religious structures and not the new cities that were being built after this. So maybe those cities were a product of the benefits that happened from the congregation of the people around these type of things.
Okay.
Like they realized that they could band together and accomplish greater tasks, and maybe that was the genesis of the idea of having a city, which of course led to social stratification and specialization and all that.
That brings to mind this concept of the survival of the fittest. I've heard people throw that saying around constantly, right?
Yeah, Druids.
And And this harkens that actually humanity thrived when it learned collectivism.
Sure, absolutely.
When it learned to pool its resources together and
use those resources, the land and the animals, and
that's when societies explode and grow. Not when everybody's running around.
And when languages are developed and alphabets are developed and writing is developed, and the stele that you'd mentioned that's not what those are. Those are like pillars or like he-shaped pillows. Monoliths. But they wrote on steles.
Yeah.
They were basically
like
clay tablets. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I always get that kind of. I'm not an archaeologist, man, or a history major. But I love this shit. Okay, almost 12,000 years old and abandoned for 9,000 years. The archaeological site of Gobekli Tepe is a head-scratcher due to a lot of reasons. The excessive ancientness of this place has made it all the way much weirder.
That's a weird sentence. All the way much weirder.
The time of construction of Gobekli Tepe is traced as far back as 12,000 years. This is a time period that is already pre-civilization.
So see, there's the thing right there, right? For it to be pre-civilized, you're saying there's no cities anywhere in the world, there's no writing, there's no systems really that are huge.
Okay.
Like once cities started being made in Samaria, one of the things that we find a lot of is these little cups, these bowls,
right?
And we've found thousands of them. They're all the same shape and size, right? Like mass produced. Things like that wasn't none of that kind of idea and stuff was around, except possibly in these places because it's pre-civilization.
Right.
But anyway.
But aren't we really assuming something if we're saying that this is an exception and obviously required civilization to pull it off?
Well, I don't know, but I don't think it required civilization to pull it off because it happened before civilization in that sense.
I've been to Coral Castle down near Homestead, Florida, or in Homestead, Florida, and according to, I don't know, the legend of that place, that was all built by one dude.
Well, yeah, but the thing that makes it suspicious is that there was modern technology around the time, even though no one's seen him using that.
Oh, like a steam shovel, or backhoes,
but we can be assured that back here
it did not exist.
No, no. Yeah. And of course, so many people had to congregate to achieve these things. We've never seen a site that was done just by one person. There's always evidence that there were many people at these sites. So that's another thing that throws into question what you were talking about, the fact that one guy did it. Like, that's never really happened before, and it only happened in modern times when there could have been some trick. And that's what the mystery is, right? No one's really seen what was being done. Although, I think we talked about it early on in one of the shows where we looked up on YouTube where there was a guy that had a technique of moving monolithic structures with just like a
lever.
Yeah.
Yeah. He would stack things up and then move big buckets of water and it would tip, and then he would put another board under it and then move a bunch of buckets of water and it would tip. So he would use the center point to cantilever things up into the air, and he took like huge concrete blocks and lifted them, with these, building like a scaffolding under it, if you will, as he went, could lift a slab of concrete like 20, 30 feet up in the air. And then made like Stonehenge like pillars that way. And he did it all by hand with just buckets of water and forms and concrete, and like he didn't use any kind of backhoe or whatever to pull it off
that anybody knows about.
No, this guy filmed the whole thing.
Right, that's right. Yeah, that's right. This guy.
He did it. He did it completely with all manpower.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
I think the only thing that I think he dug the holes. He could have shoveled it. He was like, but for the sake of expediency, look, I'm going to use a backhoe to dig the dirt out here. And with the way that they stood those stones up, it was wild. Like they put them, they were sort of laid down into the hole, and then he used a hose to spray away dirt, and the whole thing just would go thunk and stand straight up.
They had that on Nova too. Basically, when you got to about 45 degrees, these other people would take over these ropes,
and they would let it, just put it right where they wanted
Except they were digging out sand in Egypt when they were doing it on the Nova documentary.
Okay.
But it's the same concept.
Same principle,
They
yeah.
dug a hole. They laid it on its side. They dug out underneath of it until they could make it fall in.
Right.
And then once they got so much, they pulled it up and then put sand in around it to straighten it.
Yeah, and it just stood up.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the archaeologists' study on Gobekli Tepe is a continuing process due to the complex revelations that the site presents. Structures that compose the site are incredibly well preserved, and this has allowed archaeologists to study them similarly as based on their original state. Turkey's climate has helped in Gobekli Tepe's remarkable preservation. However, one startling factor of its preservation is the way that the temple sites seem to have been backfilled. The backfilling of the place before being abandoned is still a mystery. The backfill protected the structures from different elements, and this helped preserve the state of Gobekli Tepe. Who would have known that people of today would still be able to discover this archaeological site?
So that's the thing, I think, one of the main things that is interesting to me and are appealing to me about the situation is that at some point in time, whatever this was, whatever it meant to the people, whatever they were doing, whatever they were worshiping, at some point they decided to fill the temple in and bury it and abandon it.
Like maybe to hide it, or because they fell out of faith with it.
That's the thing. That's what's so interesting, right? Like
Right.
the easy assumption is, like you said, to hide it. Like that maybe there was an invasion on the way and it was holy to them, so they wanted to hide it, much like the Jewish people did with the Ark in the first sack of Jerusalem. Or in the second, right?
Like Nebuchadnezzar or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, maybe that's why they did it. But if it wasn't for that reason, then your brain really starts going wild about, well, why would you do it? And of course, when we talk about this stuff too, we're like, oh my God, it's Gobekli Tepe, it's changing everything. It's like, yeah, but that's just the first one they found, right? They just stumbled upon this by accident. There was a farmer trying to remove a block, and it turned out to be a temple. So you know what I mean?
Happens all the time.
It does. It really does. Like the Nag Mahal Library was found when a camel that a tourist was riding
Stepped through a hole, right?
Or
Yeah.
like in the caves of Qumran when the boy was looking for fire chip starters,
Yep.
So, I mean, they find this stuff just randomly every so often. There could be other temples. If there were other temples, maybe they're filling a temple in because there's some other phase or something that they're doing.
It's kind of true, right? That sites are historical. So generally when you find what you consider to be a religious temple somewhere, it's probably on top of another religious temple because the sites seem to become sacred. And then conquering religions and societies will just sort of build temples on top of the last people's temple kind of thing. So I've heard that there's shit under Gobekli Tepe.
I have not heard that, but I wouldn't doubt
layers of these things.
Possibly so.
Maybe they'll say something about it here, but okay. So if you still haven't grasped how old Gobekli Tepe is, take Stonehenge for instance, and add 6,000 years more to it. This is how ancient the site of Gobekli Tepe is. Stonehenge is popular for showcasing prehistoric construction feats by humans. Take into consideration that there is an unearthed area older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years is already mind-boggling. Another basis for comparison in the era of Sumer, this is where writing has been considered to be invented. Gobekli Tepe is also older with a margin of 6,000 years.
So see what I'm saying? If our history books and the going idea is that writing and civilization and cooperation all formed in Sumer, right? This was 3,000 years ago. Going, did they do this without writing? Did they do this without language? I mean, they surely had to have some way of communicating how many people could work on a large-scale project, right?
And move supplies and have things show up on time.
Yeah, all the logistics of it.
Because when you look at this, I mean, this is, there's stuff broken here, obviously, but I mean, there's some real coordination going on here of some sort. And all the wood shit that we see in the picture here, for those who are listening, there's a picture with like That's all been added by the archaeologists.
So if they find writing in here,
Yeah.
that'll blow their mind. They thought writing was invented 6,000 years after this. If they find writing here,
Yeah.
it'll blow their mind. And the only thing that they know of that existed before writing was a token system that had been in place since Neolithic times, since about 4,000 years past Gobekli Tepe.
It was like a trade and barter type device then?
Yeah, little emblems and coin-like things with things drawn on them that had representation. And we still don't know what the value or representation of these things are, but we have found these things all across Europe, and there seemed to be some kind of a trade with them, but we don't know how they worked out the value or the meaning behind them.
Gotcha.
So we had the capacity to be doing that sort of thing, but it hadn't happened yet, but maybe it had, right? You find this, and you see all of this that's indicative of having these things, which are culture, like the writing is culture, an alphabet is culture, a way of worshiping is culture, right? We didn't think any of that was really settling in until 6,000 years after that. But then you find this and you think, well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe that stuff was all in play and we just don't understand it or haven't found enough because it's so ancient.
Right. It's possible. I mean, well, okay, so
Graham Hancock.
Right, no, right, and all, yeah. I put something. It was funny. I put something up of his the other day. I'm trying to think what it was, and so somebody was like, it was on the No Shit Cast. It was like Graham Hancock. Why don't you just start posting shit from ancient aliens or whatever?
That'd be Giorgio Tsoukalos or Eric Von Daniken.
And then I can, I've heard a lot of the stuff that Graham Hancock has said and predicted and shit. And then you look at sites like Gobekli Tepe and you go, of all of those, he's the least crazy.
I agree. Totally agree. Out of Tsoukalos, Van Daniken.
Oh, I don't consider Graham Hancock to be in the same.
He used to be a little bit more like them, but when he started, I don't know what happened to him, but at some point he started doing DMT and psilocybin.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and he totally distanced himself from the weird shit and really started concentrating on the weird shit that we talk about with the proto-religions and the drugs and all of this stuff.
Right.
So you're right. He is the least crazy or most crazy like us.
I mean, look, he made a lot of predictions and when he made them, he was heavily ridiculed. Okay.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden,
they find
they start finding this shit, and it's like, oh, well, maybe he was right.
And he's like, you want to buy my book?
Yeah, really. Gobekli Tepe is not only astounding for its age, but also for its architectural style. Yeah, baby, got some swag, baby.
Yeah.
As seen on the details of the temples, the construction quality and craftsmanship in Gobekli Tepe are way ahead of its time. Another head scratcher is how could a construction like this even be able to stand for a long time if construction should not have even been possible at this time? Well, there's that. It's like finding a fucking airplane.
Yeah.
Like 1,000 years before the Wright brothers ever flew.
Yeah.
The architecture, engineering, and even project managing needed to accomplish this ancient site are truly mind-boggling if you analyze the state of human civilization during this period.
Or at least what we know of it.
Yeah, or what we think we know of it. Gobekli Tepe has impactfully forced archaeologists to restudy the true dawn of civilization.
And maybe buy a Graham Hancock book.
I suggest that anyway, yeah. Gobekli Tepe is a huge construction project, even from modern standards. The requirement for manpower would take hundreds just to be able to construct the huge temples. This also required a significant amount of time. The possibility of this construction is only feasible if there was an organized social structure in place. Up until this day, modern people might not understand fully the intelligence of the people behind Gobekli Tepe.
See, that's what I was saying, man. The implications is that to build it, you need these things that we only ever seen any evidence of 6,000 years later.
Right.
So either we're wrong about when those things started, which is weird because then imagine that they had everything to make cities but didn't for 6,000 years, or we're going to find some underground forgotten city that's fucking old.
Then all of a sudden, if the Sphinx is actually 10,000 years older.
Again, being sites built upon sites, as you mentioned.
Yeah. and was pointed at Sagittarius, whatever the fuck they say, because it doesn't align that way anymore because of
the stars and the precession of the planet.
Yeah. But if you rewind the clock to 10,000 years ago or whatever, it points directly at a constellation.
Sure.
The dog constellation or something like that, I think, right?
Serious?
And then was later, or it was a lion that was later carved down into the face of a pharaoh or whatever. But
yeah, because the legend is that.
Well, then, what's his name? Robert Schoch from Boston University,
Schoch and Adam West, or not Adam West, but the last name's West, West.
That say that there's water erosion marks on the base of the Sphinx.
But that's been disproven because they say that there's salt in it, and it's the salt erosion from the wind that's making that, and it's not water erosion from 10,000 years ago. It's more recent erosion from wind. That's what I have heard as the counter argument.
I know that Robert Schoch vehemently disagrees with that as of recently.
Him and his long curly locks.
Yep.
He looks like a boy. Is it weird that I know all these people by name and what they look like?
They're interesting dudes.
They are.
Man. I mean,
and no, it was Anthony West. Anthony West and Robert Schoch were the two people that teamed up to figure that out, or to imply that. Anthony West he had like a mustache. And looked like he was from the 30s or something. But Robert Schoch he had long curly hair and had a real boyish face.
And he's still a professor at Boston University.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because he's on a lot of the ancient aliens, but he really doesn't subscribe to any of that
Not
shit.
most of it, no.
He's, not any of it.
Well, I mean,
I consider believes that the Sphinx is older and that there's water. That's his one thing.
Now, you know who Edgar Cayce is, right?
Yeah.
The sleeping prophet.
Yep.
Also the guy that made the game Pit.
Yes.
So, he famously predicted that there was structures underneath the Sphinx and a library. Yeah, and that knowledge in that library and that construction came from people from Mars that fled their planet because Mars's precession is crazy compared to ours. It turns all around and stuff. And they fled the planet and came here, and they were Egyptians or Atlanteans, essentially. They were Atlanteans. This is like a Graham Hancock thing, too. They came here 10,500 years ago. Their symbol was the dragon, which is why you find symbology of dragons like all over the place, right? But that's really not the reason why. But that's what Graham Hancock was saying.
This is the theory you're talking about. You're not saying any of this is true. You're saying this is the theory.
In fact, I would refute this with other facts. But Hancock and Cayce, they all have this overarching idea that people came from Mars, where the Cydonia region is, and they came here and they started in the Azores, they think, out in the middle of the ocean, and that they had colony cities of Carthage and Egypt and a few other places were like colonies of Atlantis. And when Atlantis sank, it left those cities there, and it's what gave them their high degree of technology in terms of astronomy and architecture.
Okay.
Right? But, and of course, tied into this is that the pyramids of the Giza Plateau are built to resemble Orion's belt.
Okay.
But that's not the reason why. I don't even remember what the first thing I was saying was that I would refute. But yeah, what was I talking about right before that?
They were Atlanteans and they came from Mars and dragons. Yeah.
I mean, because you think about that, right? And you know that the Chinese and their history, they have dragons. You know, the Europeans have dragons, But the reason why that is because all ancient people found dinosaur bones in the earth. Right?
Right.
If you look at
great serpent, dinosaur is like giant serpent, or I think is literally what that means, isn't it?
Yeah, and
terrible lizard. Terrible lizard. That's it. Yeah, we looked this up once.
and the thing is, they were everywhere. They were on every continent because Pangea was a thing, right? And it broke up, so that's why they're on every continent. So every culture grew up with finding these bones. And just to give a case in point, take one culture, the Greeks. We have found ancient dinosaur bones in ancient Greek temples inscribed with Greek mystical letters and words and stuff, right?
Okay.
We have found where ancient Greek people have tried to
Anthropomorphize,
yeah, the bones that they found
Yeah.
and build them into human-looking shapes, right?
That's where they came up with the
Legend of the Cyclops,
because
yeah.
it was woolly mammoth
And the
bones.
griffin,
Yeah.
right? So, and if you look at where the Greeks say that the battles of the gods happened between the Titans, the old gods, and
Right.
the new Olympian deities,
Let me guess. There's dinosaur bones everywhere. Right?
they're all dinosaur graveyards. So they ancient times, just like they would watch the sky and note things, they
Yeah.
did the same thing on the ground. They knew where these bones were. They found these bones, and they would find these giant femurs bigger than me.
Right.
And that's why they said there was giants in the earth
Yeah.
in those days, and that's why there's so many legends about giants, and that they were like predecessors that mankind or the gods superseded and destroyed. That's why you
Right.
have these legends. So literally, dinosaurs are the reason why the ancient Greeks thought that there was a race of titans that was defeated by the Olympian gods, and this happened in every culture, and that's why there's the symbolism is in every culture.
And this isn't just a plausible explanation, right? Like you can actually trace back documentation and everything to exact places and things
Yes.
and go, oh,
At least in the Greek world, you can. The
Yeah,
research
yeah.
has been done there that most extensively, right? And there's
so
only
that's what the Greeks were blaming it on.
yeah.
And we know that to be kind of a fact.
Yes.
Like this isn't speculation.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Historical fact.
Yes, there's a few books. There's a couple of books really that's wrote about this that you can go and get and read if you want to. But yeah, and the same thing with the pyramids being built to look like the Belt of Orion.
Yeah.
which I'm sure you've heard.
I absolutely have heard
But the
that,
reason why they're offset in that fashion is because the plateau that they're on, the Giza plateau, is eroded away in that fashion. They didn't build them all at the same time. They didn't plan them all at the same time. So when it came time to make the other ones, and they had to find a place, they couldn't put them exactly in a line because there was
Right.
no plateau there. So they had to back up a little bit and put it in there. And so it was the contour and shape of the land that forced them into making these things where they're at.
Again, the site was sacred.
Yes.
So they used it.
As
and they
much
used
as
it
they
as much
could.
as they could.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the what's it called? The ones in Peru.
The Peruvian, like Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu and
the one that's near it with the big blocks.
Sacsayhuaman and like all of those, right? Isn't there one of those that's supposed to be lined up at the
There
exact
is,
same dimensions? That
but
the
they're
pyramids-
not exact at all. If you actually look at
Is
the
that
maps,
right?
yeah,
So
they're not exact.
This is wishful thinking on somebody's.
Not only is it wishful thinking, but in the history of the Peruvians, they themselves note that these temples are built on that spot because it was a sacred spot or a battle occurred on that
Right.
spot, and they built it there because they won a battle or this thing happened. So in their own history, they've got the reasons why they've put these things where they're at.
Right.
Again, just trying to use a sacred space or a monumental space where something monumentous happened.
Right.
In the best way they can. Like, for instance, as an example of this happening, even again with the Greek people, but the word trophy comes from a Greek word that's the way it's spelled. It looks like it's strophe, right? But what that meant to the Greeks was it was an altar. It was this portable altar called a strophe that when they would have their battles, it was hoplite battles. Like the hoplites are these Greek people who didn't have a lot of training, but they had this heavy armor, heavy shield, and a spear, right? And because they were fighting over land, the idea was you were either trying to drive the other group off of a place, or as that group, you were trying to maintain that spot and not let these people drive you off, right?
Right.
So when they would clash and have their battles, there was always a point at when if the people driving these people off got the upper hand, these people would let go of their shields and their spears because they were the heaviest things that they had, and they would book it out of the way. And that's how they would rout, because these guys couldn't chase them because A, they had their armor and stuff, their shield and their spear, and B, the point was to try to occupy the area and claim this area to be used for growing food, right?
Okay.
So wherever the point was where the tide of the battle turned, you could know where that was at because it was the spot where all these people dropped their shit and left. So they would go to that spot because that's that's the magic spot where it happened.
Okay.
Where they got the upper hand, and they would open up this, like it was a little thing that they would open up a little altar, and they would pledge to their deities. Because that's where it happened. The deities of war, they would pledge themselves to the deities of war because at that spot for that reason.
It was where they achieved victory, where the gods saw favor,
yes,
and gave them their breaking.
And that's why you
moment.
get a trophy for winning on the field of battle.
That's funny. That's funny. I never knew that.
Yeah, but you can see why these things are important to be marked. Even the Peruvians,
unless you're
are
from the
marking.
Confederacy, then you get a trophy for losing.
Yeah, your participation trophy. It only lasts for so long before if someone's going to take that down.
Gets pissed and rips it down.
Right.
Gobekli Tepe is a huge construction project for even modern standards. The requirement for manpower would take hundreds just to be able to construct the huge temples. It's also required a significant amount of time. The possibility of this construction is only feasible if there was an organized social structure. Did I read this already?
No, I think we were
up until
talked a
this
lot about
day.
it.
Modern people might not fully. Gobekli. Oh, look, there's Joe Rogan.
Oh my gosh, Rogan! Oh, are you serious?
No, I'm dead serious.
Oh my God! Of
Gobekli
course.
Tepe was already discovered, but it was kept ignored for almost 30 years. No one truly realized the significance of its existence until 1994. It was previously assessed as only a medieval graveyard. It was basically rediscovered back in 94, and traits of the site significantly made an impact on archaeologists ever since. A German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt led the charge of this rediscovery. Learn more about Klaus Schmidt here from Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock. Graham, look, hi, Graham. I think it's 1284. So he was still tripping balls when he did that.
Yes, if you would just have some psilocybin, you would understand Gobekli Tepe.
But he doesn't. The last I heard, he doesn't even smoke pot or anything. Like he went completely. He quit doing all of that now.
I
The last
didn't hear
interview
that.
I saw with him, I think it was on Rogan. He said he was completely sober.
Huh.
Like he was like, yeah, it kind of ran its course, kind of thing. And now he's on to being, I don't know, present. Is that the right way to say? Archaeologists have considered Gobekli Tepe as a religious structure. This instantly makes it the oldest temple in the world. The age of its existence holds a large margin between the next oldest religious structure in the world. This place being a massive religious construction adds more mystique.
Now, see, and then the next thing here that you're going to read, that is something that I've always talked about too, is like one of the main interesting things about the megalithic structures is that they're megalithic, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to say build something like the Pyramid of Khufu, and the Giza pyramids, the big one.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, right? It's aligned to the cardinal directions. It's really tall, this, right? But the fact that they're doing it in 50-ton blocks as a minimum, like, where did that idea come
And
from?
why?
Yeah,
It's,
I mean,
makes
obviously
it
it's
so much harder
yeah,
to do.
it's all, they're already talking about how many people it would take and how long it would take and the logistics being a big deal, right?
Right.
So on top of that, can you imagine if we were telling that to like maybe 700 people from our city of Lancaster, and then we're like, oh, and we're going to do it with 50-ton blocks.
Everybody's just like, just go. Yeah, go to hell.
Like why would you do that?
Yeah.
And they don't. And there's no one that knows, and they do it everywhere. Like everywhere, there's these big megalithic structures. It's not just one group of people. It's like somehow they all had the idea that building big was the way to go.
Yeah, no shit. At its center, there are huge pillars topped with massive stone blocks. The massive pillars weigh tens of tons. Estimates even range from 20 to 60 tons.
See, averaging 50-ton blocks, man.
So placing these blocks in a place is already a mind-boggling task. How would ancient humans replace these blocks perfectly? That is quite a daunting question. It would take intelligent ancient engineers to construct the whole place. And look at that. That's, I don't know, it's like a jaguar or something carved in relief
Yeah.
on this. So they started with the 60-ton block was actually 100 tons before they carved all the reliefs out of it first. You follow me?
Yeah,
so it's even more ridiculous than
Well,
that.
and doesn't that show the amount of pre-planning that was done?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Uh,
Hey,
oh,
more.
Okay, so a lot of stones in Gobekli Tepe have artistic value. The central pillars can be seen with decorations of elaborate drawings, mostly of animals. There are also intricate animal statues that were carved onto the surface of a pillar. This is the art. This is the art that is way ahead of its time. Gobekli Tepe is still an ongoing archaeological study, but the findings of this mind-boggling site showcased a series of answers, but also a series of questions that challenged the dawn of civilization. Our old understanding of ancient architecture, engineering, and social structures are being questioned by this one. Significant archaeology mystery.
Mm.
Yeah. It is neat, though. I love it because they're always finding out new shit there, too.
Yeah.
But the last that I had understood, I wonder when this article came out. The last that not too long ago,
2020,
was that they had found multiple of those rings.
Three of them. That's what I heard.
And then a bunch of small ones that were buried all around the area, too.
And they recently found a huge, I think the largest megalithic structure, the remains of it, somewhere near Stonehenge, just recently, like in the last couple of days.
The latest thing I heard about Stonehenge was the ring of
the little stones that
goes out even further.
No, this is something
this
more
is like
recent.
grave sites. There's like a ring of grave sites around
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, this is more recent than that.
Wow. Yeah, it's not. And as our ability to measure shit gets better, we're just learning more and more about things. I love science, man.